So welcome everyone. I'm Ken Cerini. I'm managing partner at Cerini Associates. We're a full service accounting firm specializing in many different industries, including nonprofit organizations. We have dubbed here at Cerini Associates October as Board Month. So throughout the month that we will be pushing out articles, you'll see some short videos coming out from us on different topics. We're going to be doing seminars like this. This is the first one. We have another one in 2 weeks from now. All of this is kind of focused on creating a more effective board. Also, feel free to visit our website. We have different documents there. We have our board guide, which you can download, and we've updated our fundraising guide on the website too, so feel free. So anyway, over the years, I've had the privilege of working with hundreds of nonprofit organizations and their boards. That goes from small, all-volunteer groups to large national, multinational, international organizations we've worked with. And it really doesn't matter the size or the mission of the organization. There are certain truths that kind of hold true no matter what. So a board that's engaged and strategic in the is the single greatest multiplier of impact a nonprofit can have. So that's what we're looking here for. So I've seen boards transform organizations not because they had deep pockets or fancy titles, but because they asked the right questions, they set clear priorities, and kept the mission at the center of every discussion. That's what we're going to dig into deeply today. So. Erin?
Yeah, and I'm Erin Teta. I'm a director here at Cerini. My background is in internal audit and governance, so I've spent a lot of time helping organizations make sure that their systems, their controls and structures are all set up for success. And what I love most about sessions like this is that we get to go beyond the compliance and really focus on effectiveness and, basically how boards are not just legally sound, but also strategically powerful. So today, we're going to keep this session practical, conversational, and hopefully inspiring. And because of what we've both seen, as far as what works and what doesn't, you'll hear plenty of real world stories along the way.
Well, you've heard Erin say that she's a director here, but don't let her sell herself short. Come January, Erin will be Cerini Associates' newest partner. So just wanted everybody to know that.
Okay, so let's talk about why this matters. We'll look at the big picture, sorry. And why are we talking about board engagement in the first place? And it's because a board isn't just a legal requirement, but it's also the heartbeat of your organization. It's the board that's going to set the vision, it's going to safeguard your mission, and it's basically what's going to shape your future. But here's the challenge. Even with the most well-intentioned boards, they can get stuck. I mean, I worked with the board once, Ken, that spent 45 minutes debating the color of their gala invitations and about 5 minutes on their strategic plan. That's not a disengaged board. They're just focused on the wrong things. So when you see that your board is engaged, it's a catalyst. Your decisions get better, your strategy gets clearer, and your fundraising becomes more intentional. And you'll see that your organization's mission is also growing stronger. And that's the kind of transformation that we're here to hopefully help you create today.
I think one of the things that we've seen is the problem is that board members don't often feel that they're the ones who are not engaged. We did a study for an organization and we asked the question on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your engagement? And the average board member said their engagement was at a level of 8. And then we said, well, how would you rate the overall engagement of the board? And the rating for the overall engagement of the board was between 4 and 5. So there's a disconnect there. And some of that has to do with, not bringing in new blood on the board and board members, on the board for a long period of time. So they kind of get caught up in a kind of a malaise in terms of what's going on there. So, it's really, really important for board members to be honest with themselves in terms of what they bring to the table and are they continuing to be effective in the process. So what are we going to accomplish together today? We're going to walk through 5 key objectives that will help your board operate at its highest level. We're going to, 1, clarify roles and boundaries, right? We're going to look at the governance, what governance actually means and how to avoid slipping into management. There's that complete distinction there between management and governance. We're going to foster engagement and strategic thinking. We'll share specific tactics to transform passive board members into active contributors, which is what we all want. We're going to strengthen financial oversight, not by micromanaging, but by understanding the story behind the numbers. We're going to look to build authentic collaboration with leadership because the board executive relationships is one of the most powerful and yet delicate dynamics in a nonprofit organization. We're going to tie board work directly to mission impact. So every decision, every discussion connects back to why you exist, right? I mean, it's that mission. It's understanding what the mission is, and every decision should be based on how it furthers the mission of the organization. Our hope is that when you walk away from today, you'll walk away with ideas that you can put into action at the very next board meeting.
Okay, so governance versus management. And I would say that this is one of the most common and also most damaging pitfalls that we see. Boards often are confusing governance with management. And you have to understand that governance is the what and the why, but your management is the how. So a great board isn't going to ask, why isn't the copier working? Instead, it's going to be asking questions like, do we have the right technology infrastructure to deliver our mission? One is tactical, right? And then the other strategic. So I know that once we sat in a meeting where the board had spent 20 minutes discussing copier toner contracts, 20 minutes, and that's not governance, that's office management. And once they were able to shift their mindset over to what technology investments will make us more impactful, this is when the conversations and the decisions became far more meaningful.
So if you kind of think about it, right, boards are like a GPS system, right? Your job is to make sure the organization's still on the right path, even when the terrain changes or there are road blockages ahead, right? You got to redeploy and get around the blockage that exists. Strategic oversight isn't about nitpicking reports. It's about asking, are we on track to reach our destination on time and within budget? That's the important part. I hear all the time about boards who spend days developing a beautifully written strategic plan. There's a glossy binder, inspiring vision, but after it's approved, it gets kind of put on a shelf and never referenced again. You know, that's not really going to be effective. It's when the board decides to tie every board agenda into a specific part of the plan, everything changes. The plan stops being a document, it becomes a decision-making tool. Again, that's what you're trying to create. That's the difference between passive oversight and strategic leadership. And the goal here is for your board to be the strategic leaders of the organization. They provide the direction for the organization.
All right, so let's look at the fiduciary duties of the board. At the core of board service, you have the three fiduciary duties. You have care, loyalty, and obedience. And these sound legalistic, but they're actually really about stewardship. Duty of care means showing up prepared and asking thoughtful questions. It's not about attendance. Duty of loyalty means putting the mission ahead of personal or professional interests. And then duty of obedience means staying true to the organization's purpose and following the law. So I had worked with a board that had approved the annual budget and they had 0 questions year after year, right? And then a new member came in, to your point, Ken, when you were saying sometimes the board gets a little stale. And it took a new person coming in to ask why one program was consistently losing money. And then that question led to a deeper analysis. And then they discovered that the program hadn't been evaluated in over a decade. So they either needed to reinvent it or they had to phase it out at that time. That's fiduciary duty in action. That's about digging deeper and protecting the mission's long-term health.
I mean, some of the thing is it's hard for a board member to follow the 3 duties if they don't understand the organization that they serve. I mean, that's part of it.
Correct.
is really just understanding how is the organization funded? What's the funding streams that are coming into the organization? What are the key metrics that the board should be focused on that will drive results? What are the primary risks that the organizations need to consider? What expenses does the organization have, exposures does the organization have from an internal and an external perspective? So it's taking the time to really understand the organization, because it's hard to govern something if you don't understand what it is you're governing. So how could you really be carrying on your fiduciary duties if you really don't know the organization you're serving on? I think one of the most misunderstood board responsibilities is advocacy. A lot of people hear that word and think, I'm not a fundraiser. I don't really know any wealthy people. I know that's kind of goes through my mind too. But advocacy isn't about shaking people down for money. It's about sharing the story of your mission and opening doors. I worked with a board who said exactly that. I'm not connected to enough people to allow me to fundraise. We encourage her to simply talk about why the organization matters to her, right? Or what's important to her as a board member, whenever it felt natural, not pushing it, but when it felt natural to her to have that conversation. I think it was a month or 2 later, she was at a dinner party and she shared a story about the impact the nonprofit was having, and someone at the table ended up becoming a $50,000 corporate sponsor. She didn't solicit the donation, she just started a conversation. That's the power of board members as ambassadors, right? That's what you are. You're an ambassador of the organization. Every introduction, every conversation, every LinkedIn post has the potential to fuel the mission.
All right. So how does the board support the executive director? And I would say that the relationship between the board and the executive director is probably one of the most relationships a nonprofit can have. And it's also one of the trickiest ones in the nonprofit world. And I would say a strong relationship is going to be built on trust, communication, but also a shared purpose. So think about this relationship like a tandem bike. You have the executive director steering and pedaling, but it's the board that should be behind giving the momentum and also the direction. So if one person's going to stop pedaling, what happens, right? The whole thing tips over. So, I had seen once we worked with a board that micromanaged, where the board micromanaged everything, right? From hiring decisions to office hours. What's going to happen? You're going to have an executive director who's exhausted and constantly on the defensive. So that doesn't work. And it took the board shifting into a governance role and focusing on the strategy and outcome, right, instead of operations, in order for their relationship to really transform. It's important to remember that the executive director is the one that needs to lead, and the board has to give the space and guide. And support doesn't always mean that you have to agree on everything that leadership says. It's about being a thought partner. It's about someone who challenges, like what we said before, someone that asks questions and helps refine ideas without getting in the way.
Erin, it also goes the other way too, though. I mean, there's
Correct.
also, and I've seen many, many instances where the executive director is the one who's the strong personality in the relationship between the board and management. And the board really just sits there, listens to the executive director report, and then not much more happens after that interchange. So, except they ate dinner too, So, I mean, one of the things, it's really, really important that the board is fulfilling its governance role, right? I mean, it's not about just going there, listening and acquiescing to the executive director. It's not about approving every single agenda item that's kind of brought in front of you. You have to challenge, you have to ask questions. A good board member, is one who doesn't just what do you call it? Rubber stamp everything. A good board member is one who's going to challenge, ask questions, going back to your story earlier about, the budget, and that one board member who kind of asked a question about a program, which led to a deeper understanding of the organization. So it's really, really important that the board is looking at these things to make sure that, they're really fulfilling their mission or their purpose as a board member. Remember, at the end of the day, part of the board's responsibility is to evaluate the effectiveness of the CEO of the organization or executive director of the organization. So if you're in a situation where all you're doing is listening to their report and kind of rubber stamping things, how do you effectively evaluate the job they're doing? So as engaged board doesn't just show up, an engaged board doesn't just show up for meetings, right? They prepare, they participate, is what we were talking about. They connect the dots between their decisions and the mission, right? Everything has to be aligned back to that mission. One of the things I tell boards all the time is print out and tape it on the table in front of you at a board meeting, or put it on your phone and have it sitting right there in front of you. What is the mission of the organization? And as you're going through and you're making decisions on behalf of the organization, it's that constant question: how does my decision align with the mission of the organization? How does my decision further the mission of the organization? That's really, again, the important part here. So kind of a quick gut check. If your board meetings feel like you're reading reports aloud and everyone's just nodding, right? That's what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Guess what? Engagement is probably low. Right? If they feel like thoughtful conversations where new ideas emerge, you're in a much healthier place, right? There you've got that engaged board, which is what we want. And if you're not getting that engaged board and they are just nodding and stuff, then we really need to figure out how do we get that board engaged, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. once observed a board where 3 people did 90% of the talking and half the members barely spoke at all. The solution is that the organization started sending discussion prompts in advance and assigning different members to lead parts of the agenda. So now what they did is they kind of forced people into that leadership role within the board, and board members, even some of which were newer to the board, who maybe didn't feel as comfortable, really felt now they had a purpose on the board, and they didn't have to, worry about that person who's been on the board for 20 years or 25 years, who knew more than they did. So they really were in a situation where, they had that leadership role. So suddenly people became, prepared to contribute, not just to listen. So they were prepared and did their homework on the areas that they were going to be talking about. And engagement shot through the roof. This is where a strong committee structure can also help, with different board members responsible for leading the committees, and then bringing back to the board that strategic discussion that's happening at the committee level. And therefore you can kind of vet things out deeper at the committee level and bring those things back and really have a more intelligent and strategic conversation.
All right, so let's talk about engagement strategies. And they don't happen by accident. This is something that you have to design for. I'd picked out some strategies that I've seen work very well. Some of them can be considered like a mini homework, right? Where you send a brief article, a podcast, maybe an impact story before the meeting. So this kind of sets the tone for your meeting. It gets your board members thinking before they show up. Another thing I like this is mission moments, where you start each meeting with a story from the field. So now you're calling on your board members to share a client success, a staff innovation, something that was a real impact. And this kind of grounds the work that you're doing with purpose. And then others, as Ken was saying before, sometimes it's about engaging everyone, and you could do that with breakout conversations. So you create these, you could even do it virtually, but little small group discussions, and that kind of gets creativity sparking. Maybe someone shy and doesn't like speaking in front of a large group, but now you have a small group, and the creativity starts going, and the quieter voices start to come forward. So one organization I know that we had started with something called mission buddies, and we had assigned the board members into mission buddy roles, and we paired them with a program or a department. So they would attend one event or a meeting each quarter, and then come back to the full board and talk about it, and let the rest of the board know really what's going on. And this really helped create discussions, curiosity, and also people, like the board members, started to own what it was that they were doing, which definitely is an engagement strategy.
It also comes back to the makeup of your board too. What's the makeup of your board? What skill sets do your board members have? So if you've got someone with a fiscal background, they're going to be much better off in leading some of the fiscal discussion. Someone with a legal background is going to be able to handle legal things. Also thinking about the kind of the cross section of the individuals you serve, and is your board representative of the individuals you serve, because they might be more strategic in thinking about, how do I get into a community that I'm having difficult time getting into, or or I'm not connecting with a certain community. But if you've got a board member who comes from that community, it might be an easier way for them to help with some of that strategic thought process. So, as you're going through those little tips that Erin threw out, also kind of think about, who your board members are, what their backgrounds are, what their skill sets are, and utilize those in terms of kind of making up or linking to those ways that you're going to try to engage your board. I think one of the best ways to move a board from passive to passionate is exposure, right? When board members see their mission in action, everything changes. And that's what Erin talked about before, is, connecting the board members to the programmatic activities that the organization is doing. I don't know about you. I mean, I read financial statements all the time, but most board members don't get excited about reading a financial statement, but they do get excited about understanding the mission of the organization and seeing that mission in action. So, we've had instances where, people join the board. Actually, I've been on boards where I never visited any of the organization's programs. So I wasn't really connected to what was going on. I attended meetings, I read reports, but it's kind of abstract, So then, I finally got a chance to go on a site visit. I met the clients, I heard stories, and the very next board meeting, I was kind of reinvigorated. So it's how do you go about, getting that board kind of involved like that? That invigoration, what does it do, right? It allows new ideas to flow. So you'll see that your board members will suggest new ideas. They can start to better connect the dots in terms of the fiscal side of things to the people that are being served and the impact that's being had. They may even volunteer for new initiatives and things that are taking place within the organization because now they're excited. Kind of think about it. It's hard to champion what you don't fully understand, right? So education through site visits, presentations, bringing some of your program people into a board meeting and doing a 5-minute presentation so that there's that connectivity, showing a short video of a family that's been helped and showing the impact that the organization is having. Tears are good at board meetings when they're done right. Or even, invite guest speakers, build empathy, build context, and get deeper commitment from your board members. Understand, when you think about it, understanding shouldn't stop at the program side. It also needs to extend to the business side also. So understanding funding, how does the organization receive its funding streams? Understanding the regulations that are in place, because if I understand the regulations, that's going to help me as a board member make more intelligent decisions. Understanding the risks that are out there and the drivers that go along the way in terms of helping to generate better revenue streams for the organization. All of that is information, right? And the more information you have as a board member, the more comfortable you feel in that discussion process, and the more you're going to be proactive in the governance process. So it's really important to have that information flow coming to the board, that education and exposure and everything else. The more the board knows, the more access the board has, the more the board feels comfortable with your organization and how your organization functions, the more effective your board member is going to be.
So let's talk about the board and strategic planning. And strategic planning is probably one of the most powerful ways that you can engage your board, but only if they're involved from the start. So I've seen many times where, to Ken's point earlier, things are just brought to the board at kind of in the 11th hour, and they're expected to, rubber stamp or approve. And lots of times that's how things are. They had no part of the plan. They had no part of shaping it. And that's a missed opportunity. When you have a board and leadership co-creating an organization's 3-year vision, for example, now they're part of the plan. They become champions of the plan. They had a hand in shaping the plan. They're not just overseeing it. I think about my 2-year-old picky eater. I used to make him cook with me because my chances were a little better that he might try it when we were done because he was a part of it. And that works with adult board members as well, I would say. Things you can use. We have retreats, workshops. You could set up special meetings. These are all different ways that you can help the board in a vision setting. And when they're part of building a plan, they're going to fight for it, even when things get tough, right? To Ken's point, if they understand what it is that they're supporting, they're going to fight for it. And the earlier you can tie in your board, the better. And the board should always be constantly, how are they supposed to have the goal in mind if they're not part of creating the goal? Right? If you think about it like that.
And when you're doing that strategic thinking and you're doing that strategic plan, and I don't know if you guys want to throw in the chat, when was the last time you guys did a strategic plan for your organization? It'd be good to kind of share, or maybe some of the stuff that came out of your strategic plan. So kind of throw some of that, or some of the things you thought about in the strategic plan. But again, you really want to look at kind of impact. And I think, the more you can kind of focus on the impact that your organization is having and understanding the impact both at a micro and macro level, that's going to be super important. The direction that you're looking to take your organization, looking to grow the organization. Are you looking to merge into another organization because of, the regulatory environment or your inability to be able to attract staff or fundraising or whatever? What resources do you have, and how do your resources are going to help to drive the results that you're looking to have? Maybe there are programs that are not effective and you've had some mission creep, and maybe it makes sense to, as Erin mentioned earlier, that one program that a board member asked about, maybe it makes sense to get rid of programs and maybe push it off to another organization that's their main part of their mission, and find ways to develop strategic alliances with them, or find better ways to collaborate. I mean, there's so many different things that can come up when people are really focused on the organization. A lot of times they go to a board meeting and, you know, there's a lot of other things on their mind, and it's a remote board meeting and they're distracted while the board meeting's taking place, or they're answering emails, which I know half of you are doing now. But, you know, if you put them in a room and you force them to focus on the organization and the strategic focus of where the organization is looking to do, you know, that's going to have a much bigger impact. So I see Marissa has kind of thrown something in there, but again, if anybody has anything they want to put in there with respect to the strategic plan, that would be great. I get to talk about fiscal oversight, so sorry guys, but this is going to be a long one. So again, if you think about it, one of the board's most critical responsibilities, in my opinion, as an accountant, is financial oversight, right? But that doesn't mean becoming the CFO of the organization. This goes back to what Erin was saying before. You have to have that separation between the organization's leadership, the internal staff, and the board. Your job isn't to manage the books, but it's to understand the story behind the numbers and make sure those numbers support the mission, right? Again, you have a responsibility in your duties to ensure that you safeguard the assets of the organization. And you can't safeguard the assets of the organization if you don't understand you know, what the costs are and everything. Erin and I are working on a project right now where we started looking at some of the contracts and outside contractors that the organization hired, and we're shaking our head in terms of how much money is going out the door for services that the organization may or may not need. You know, so it's really important to kind of look at budgets, look at how you compare to budgets. Are you in line with what the expenditure pattern should be?
Understanding your needs.
Yeah. I mean, I find, honestly, too often boards treat the financial section of the meeting as a formality. You know, it's like a quick review, a few nods. Yeah, good. Yeah, we approve. Yeah, the treasurer said some words and talked about some numbers, and everything's good. Part of this is often a lack of understanding of the fiscal aspects of a nonprofit, right? Which can be really complex. The best boards, as you said before, Erin, ask why. Why did the expenses spike here? Why is the program costing more but serving fewer people? Are we investing in things that truly advance the goals of the organization? One board I worked with started running regular what if scenarios. What if a major grant wasn't renewed? What if a key donor stopped giving, right? It's important to understand that, and it's important to kind of incorporate that into your budgeting system. We talk about it all the time. If you've heard me speak in the past, you've heard me say, you know, developing those, you know, contingent budgets is super important. You know, and, you know, that organization I was talking about that started that what if, they had a situation where one of their biggest funders pulled out, and they were prepared for it. They had gone through that what if scenario. They had determined what they would do if there was a decline in their revenue, and they were able to react quickly because they were prepared for it. I think one of the other things, and this is kind of throwing this out here, but I think we see that boards don't always take advantage of resources that are available to them. No. When we as auditors meet with the boards of our nonprofits, most of the time we ask, how much time do we have? And we're told, oh, you got 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So we're going to present a full year of information in 15 or 20 minutes. 2 weeks ago, I met with a board, and what they did is they set up a separate meeting just for us to meet with the board. And we went over audit results. We went over trends within the organization. We talked about the story behind the numbers, the direction the organization was moving in. We talked for about an hour and a half. And through that, we talked about, again, benchmarks, risks, concerns, all of that stuff. It was a great meeting. You know, we talked about potential strategies of what the board can do to improve operations. It was active. The board was engaged. The board walked away with a much deeper understanding of the organization's finances, and they were truly appreciative of what took place in that conversation. It's very difficult for a board to exhibit strong fiscal oversight if they're only receiving financial information at the meeting or hours before. That's another thing we hear all the time.
All the time.
I just got the information this morning, or a lot of times when we go to meet with the board, the financial statements, the first time the board has ever seen the financial statements is when we go in to do the
In
meeting.
that moment. Mhm.
You know, so if you're just giving the board information, you know, at the time of the meeting, they're not going to be prepared. They're not going to have been able to digest it. What we suggest is that you try to get the information to the board a week before the meeting takes place. This way they have ample time to review it, understand it, and generate questions. Finally, and we've talked about before, and we'll talk about it some more, committees, right? Committees are very, very important because not everything can happen in a 1 or 2 hour board meeting. You need to go deeper into things. So even if that, you know, the meeting I talked about before where we met with the board for an hour and a half, I mean, something like that can happen at an audit or finance committee or risk management committee or whatever level. But it's really important to have committees because committees provide an opportunity for deeper dives into areas, right? Like audit results, investment reviews. You have to do investment reviews if you have investments under the New York Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, cybersecurity threats. All of those things are things that then can be handled at a committee level and brought to the board in a more thoughtful way.
All right, so let's talk about risk. And the board plays a large role in risk management for an organization. Lots of times when we talk risk, people think it's financial, but risk is way beyond financial. It could be reputational, it could be operational, it could be legal, it could even be strategic. And pretending that risk doesn't exist doesn't make it go away. A board should understand all the risks. I know that at a previous job that I was on, I was the liaison for the audit committee. One thing that was always on our agenda was a risk topic. So you have your whole agenda, and one of the line items was always the risk of, let's say, the month, you know, and we would take a moment, even if nothing was going on at that time, to just discuss the risk. To Ken's point, like what if scenario, what could happen, and preparing, and it also got conversation going. Boards should have risk conversations. They should happen ideally quarterly, at least annually. What are our risks beyond the finances? What are our internal controls? Many don't know what internal controls are. You know, what do we have in place to prevent something from happening? And then should something happen, what do we have in place to detect that it happens so we could jump on that before it's too late? You know, how would we do in a government audit? How would we prepare for a leadership transition? You know, conversations like this can be uncomfortable, but they're essential. And these are the conversations that the board should be having.
I mean, we're super big proponents of risk committees. So you have a committee that kind of focuses on risk, and that can include board members, internal staff, and external sources to really kind of focus on what are the risks. And I agree with you, Erin. You know, I don't think once a year is enough to talk to the board about risk. I think that has to happen at least on a quarterly basis. And I do want to make a comment about something Cynthia said in the chat. She said one of the challenges she has is with the board is that no one has time. And you know, one of the things I find is a lot of nonprofits, they all try to get the same people on their boards. You know, so they'll go and try to get the CEO of XYZ company on their board. And maybe it makes sense to bring on someone from XYZ company who's a little bit lower down on the food chain, who isn't as well sought after, but maybe has, you know, strong skill sets that they can lend to the organization. So, you know, you don't always have to go to the top and get the top person. Sometimes it makes sense to get someone into the organization who, or sorry, on your board, who maybe is not the top person overall, but someone who's going to have the time and the energy to be able to commit to the organization, because oftentimes that's more important. So the best board leadership relationships are built on trust and transparency, right? If either one is missing, it's only a matter of time before cracks form. So you have to be able to trust, you have to have that good open communication, that communication that happens between the board president or chairman of the board and the CEO is critical in any relationship. A healthy relationship means leadership shares both the wins and the challenges, and the board responds with support and accountability, right? I mean, you have to be there to support your leadership, but you have to also demand results from your leadership. So it's kind of a give and take sort of relationship that's there. It also means board meetings are more than status updates, as we talked about before. They need to be strategic conversations. I often encourage organizations to use dashboards and key metrics to focus discussions. Instead of flipping through dozens of pages of financial statements, we highlight the few data points that truly matter, and we spend our time talking about those. So again, when we do a board presentation with our boards, we're looking at trends. We're looking to tell the story of the organization so that really the board can get a deeper understanding. Because again, as I said before, there's a lot of people on the board who don't have that fiscal oversight or fiscal understanding. So we want to make it simple. We want to make it graphic and everything so they can see it and understand. If I sit there and say, well, one of the things we want to see is we want to see an increase in your net assets year over year, and we can show a chart that shows your net assets are moving up in an upward direction, that's good. The board understands. Oh, that's what he said. That's a positive. That's what I'm looking for. So that's where, board meetings shift from reporting sessions to strategic dialogue, because now the board understands and they can ask the questions that they need to ask. Remember, it is the board's role to set policy, right? That's ultimately in this leadership collaboration component. The board sets policy, right? They provide the broad stroke vision for the organization, the big picture. These are the guardrails that are set in place to keep the organization on the road, right? Management, they implement procedures to ensure that the policies are being met by the organization. Those are the controls to safeguard assets, the reporting to track the use of funds, the practice to ensure contracts, restrictions, regulations, grant terms, those are all being followed, right? That's the day-to-day stuff that's taking place. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, the board needs to make sure that management and the organization staff are doing what they're supposed to do. So the board needs to monitor that the procedures are effective through such tools as budget to actual reporting. Okay, I set a budget up. Okay, how are we doing with respect to that budget? Open dialogue and communication with management, having that discussion points. What's going right? What's going wrong? Where are the risks? What are we having issues with? Committee oversight, that's going back to that committee structure and having that strong committee structure. And then even those discussions with the external auditors in terms of really gaining an understanding of how the organization is doing. So again, it's about oversight and making sure that you understand how the organization is functioning and stuff. It's not about micromanaging. We shouldn't be, as a board, sticking our tendrils into all aspects of the organization and picking up the phone and having a discussion with the accounts payable clerk or the CFO, unless there's a real need to do. Everything should filter through the CEO of the organization, and you should have that good open dialogue so that everything is up and up and not kind of micromanaged.
All right, let's talk about mission alignment. At the end of the day, it always comes down to the mission. Every agenda item, every committee, every decision that you make should answer the question, how does this move us closer to our purpose? We had, Ken and I are working with the client that has like 14 different committees. Half of them aren't even relevant. They haven't met in years. It's about restructuring, making, whittling it down to 5 effective committees and making sure that they each directly align with the strategic goal of the organization. And when you do that, you're going to see that the difference is night and day. You're more focused, what you're doing, your outcomes become measurable, and your board becomes more engaged. It's not about, mission alignment is not about doing more, it's about doing what matters the most, right? So boards that keep the mission front and center, they're going to make better decisions and they're going to have a greater impact. So it's also about understanding what perspective, what your skills are on your board and what your needs are. And to Ken's point earlier, you want to make sure that you're recruiting to fill your gaps. So this client that I'm talking about earlier, they have 1 million committees, they have a bunch of board members. No one understands how to read a budget. No one understands how to go over their 990 or their financial statements. If you see that you're missing someone with like any kind of fiscal acumen, you want to bring on someone that has an accounting background or a financial advisor or a banker, or even if you have no one, someone with a genuine interest that will learn. Because if you don't have anyone on your board that can handle your financial understanding, that's a major gap. There's no way you could be effective that way. That being said, also what Ken was saying earlier, if you don't have anyone on your board that truly understands the community that you're serving, how do you serve that community, right? So consider entering into board agreements where you outline expectations that you're going to have from both the organization and the board member. Lots of times people I would say I've heard a lot of board members say, I would like to be on a board, but I don't know what that means for me. I don't know what that requires of me. Maybe the person doesn't have enough money, or they think that they're not educated enough in financial stuff that they wouldn't be effective on the board, or they don't realize that they only have to meet maybe this many times. They think they're meeting all the time. Put your expectations on the table from the beginning. Let them know we require you to have meeting attendance. We require you to be, to Marissa's point, a sponsor of one of our initiatives. We require you to have some kind of financial support. Put that all up front. Another thing is having a board portal, right? So Ken spoke about, I was at a board meeting 2 days ago, and they were literally picking up all the reports that we kill millions of trees every year. And they're picking up these massive reports from all their auditors, and they're sitting down and looking at it for the first time. That doesn't work. No one's going to have a question when you're going through piles of paper. You need to have a board portal. You can upload everything, and it should be, I know at my old job, we had stuff uploaded at least 3 weeks in advance. These are busy people that you're plucking and putting on your board. They need time to actually sit and digest what they're going to be discussing. And this should also help board members understand what they're walking into and get better acclimated at their role. I know that I've heard many say the first year, but now the second year, I feel like I'm getting some traction. I feel like I know what I'm doing. So the idea before of having that buddy maybe on the board, someone that's been there a while that could talk to the newbie that comes in, it gets you some momentum right away.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, when you're kind of looking at that whole aspect of, recruitment and everything else, I know that's one of the biggest challenges that board members or that boards have or nonprofits have is how do I go about and find new board members? How do I attract new board members, and how do I keep them kind of engaged within the organization? One of the things that I would like to ask, and if people can kind of throw in the chat, that would be amazing, is how many of you guys do board member rotation? I know a lot of times nonprofits are worried about board member rotation because, when they think about board member rotation, it's like, oh, it's hard enough to find boards. I don't want to let them loose once I have them. But I can tell you, there was one board I was on. I had served on the board for about 15 years. And I'd say probably from year 9 on, I was trying to get off the board and they wouldn't let me off. They just refused to let me off the board. And even though the organization had kind of gone in a different direction from what I was interested in from the organization, it was a great direction. The organization should have gone in that direction, but it was not where my interest lied. So I kind of felt like I was one of those ineffective board members who wasn't as engaged as I should be, wasn't doing what I should be doing, so it's kind of important to really understand, in terms of all of that so that you can kind of, decide. And that's what I said, that's why it's important to understand, do you guys do a rotation or require board members to come out off the board? In addition, Erin, you mentioned something. You talked about, having that communication with your board members because sometimes they don't know what their role is or whatever. I think part of it is also asking. You can't just assume that a lawyer came on the board, so they're going to be your lawyer. Maybe the lawyer didn't want to be a lawyer when they came on the board. Maybe they came on because they love your program and they want to get more deeply involved in the programmatic aspects of your organization. So I think it's really important. That goes back to the board contracts or the board agreements. It's really important to understand what the expectations are from your board members and what they want from being a board member, because there may not be that alignment between what it is you think they want or what you want and what they want. So I think that's something that you really need to kind of go back and look at and have that conversation. One of the things we're kind of winding down on slides. We expected you guys to ask more questions. So we do have more slides. We will continue to talk here, but we were expecting you guys to ask more questions. So please, please, please ask questions. Otherwise we may run out of material.
Okay, I thought I heard someone talk. Okay. As we start to wrap up, or not, if you have questions, I want you to pause and reflect, right? Not out loud, but to yourself. Think about your board and how engaged do you think your board is? Like really? Are your meetings dynamic? Do you look forward to them? Are they forward looking? Do you feel like you have a checklist and you're checking things off, or are you just checking boxes? Are you looking at strategy? Are you prioritizing the items on your agenda? Are you stuck? What happens at your board meetings? Do you really think that your board is engaged? And then think about one action that you can take in the next quarter to improve that engagement. Maybe you launch a new committee. Maybe it's rethinking how you structure your meetings. Maybe it's just starting a deeper conversation with your executive director. Whatever it is, something very small can end up making a very large impact. So, we have a question? Yep.
Before we get that question, one of the things I probably failed to mention on the previous slide when we were kind of talking a little bit about committees. Again, what we're finding now is board members, as someone had mentioned earlier, board members are super busy, right? So you're not going to take up 5 hours of their time, once a month or whatever it is. So committees, that's where a lot of the board work gets done, right? A lot of stuff happens at the committee level. So if you don't have a strong committee structure, it's something you should look at. But you also have to be careful because you need to have, you want board members to be on the committees. So you can't sit here and say, I'm going to put out 10 committees and I have 4 board members. It's not realistic. So again, you have to really look at what it is you're trying to accomplish as an organization, what that structure looks like in terms of what that committee structure needs to be. You need to maybe rethink and go back to your bylaws and say, well, how many board members am I allowed to have? Maybe that's not enough. Maybe I need more. So you need to kind of look at all those things. But again, we talk about committees, and as I said, that's where the work gets done, but only if they're structured intentionally, right? Committees should reflect your strategic priorities, not just historical habits, right? Just because you've had a committee for the last 10 years doesn't mean that that's the right committee to have in place, right? You need to kind of look at what it is that's important to the organization. What are the key focuses of the organization? Where's the organization looking to go, right? And those are the things that you want to kind of incorporate. So if advocacy is essential to your organization, build a committee around advocacy. So it's really kind of looking at what you need to do. And then I mentioned recruitment, and we talked about recruitment. I just want to stress also that's not about filling empty seats, right? You don't just go and bring in board members. I kind of laugh all the time. You go to hire as a nonprofit organization, you go to hire a receptionist for the front desk, and you put them through 3 levels of interviews. And then somebody comes in and says, all right, I'll be a board member. No interview, no nothing. Great, I got someone who wants to be a board member. And you bring them on your board. You need to go through that thoughtful interview process too when someone wants to be on the board, to see if they are the right fit for the organization, if they meet the needs of the organization. It's about finding people whose skills, whose perspectives, whose passion align with your mission, right? A well-chosen board member can transform the organization's reach and effectiveness, and that's really what you're looking for. So think about your board like an orchestra, right? Each person brings a different instrument, but together they create something far more powerful than just one of them could alone. So again, think of it from that perspective. How do the board members come together? And they don't always have to agree. I mean, there could be some discord that happens. Sometimes I'm into heavy metal. Sometimes discord sounds great. So, you got to be thinking about it from that perspective.
Instead of an orchestra, right? A heavy metal band. I'd also say lots of times a misconception is, or maybe it was traditionally, that a board member has to donate, that a board member has to have money that they could put towards the mission. And what I'm seeing now is boards are looking to the younger generation that might be earlier in their career and they don't have cash to donate. However, their skill set when it comes to social media and the way that they can communicate the nonprofit's mission, like really advocate for it. There's so much value in the way that they can get your message out. They can have the greatest impact without having the financial donation part of it. So don't necessarily, we have these spots available, but we're looking for a very specific type. Think about what, to Ken's point, what unique ability they may have that could, if they're bringing in donors, then they don't necessarily have to be one, right? So think out of the box and think about how you're going to build that board, for your mission.
And the other thing is, if you already have 3 lawyers on the board, do you want another lawyer, or are you looking for other skill sets? So again, it's trying to find that balance as to what's going to provide, strong, effective leadership. You want different perspectives. You want different thought processes. You want, a board that's reflective of the population you serve and all of those things. So there are a couple of questions that were in here. How do you encourage longtime board member who doesn't do much to virtually leave the board? It's not easy. Again, that's where I'm a big proponent of board terms, because that becomes an easy process to get them off the board. You have the maximum of 2 3-year terms, and after 2 3-year terms, they have to leave the board for at least a year before they come back. So something like that makes it a lot easier, because then if you didn't want them on the board and they want to come back, you can say no, and it's easy because they're not on the board anymore. So I'm a big proponent of board terms, and if you don't have them in place and you've got one of those lingering board members, you may want to look to add board terms to your what do you call it? Your bylaws. The other thing is just sit down and have a conversation with the person. Maybe the person doesn't understand they're not being effective. Maybe the person doesn't understand, that the organization has kind of passed them by a bit. So by having that conversation with them, whether it's you, most likely I would suggest that you have your board president or CEO do it. I'm sorry, board president or chairman of the board do it, unless he or she's the one who's the lingering problem. Then you can have another board member speak to them. But again, if someone's not going to be engaged, if not someone's not going to be adding value to the organization, then they probably shouldn't be taking up a seat. And again, this also goes back to those board agreements. If you have a board agreement and you outline what the responsibilities are in the board agreements and people aren't living up to it, it's something easy you can point at and say, hey, we had this board agreement and you're just not really coming through on this. And then there was another question.
Yeah, I see the question from Jim about post-COVID engagement on the Zoom meetings. And I would say something that I find very effective. I had mentioned earlier the small breakouts, right? We could do them in person, but you can also do them on Zoom. And it has to do with arranging your agenda so that maybe you pose a question, right? So on the agenda, you have that topic that you want to talk about, or that, that engaging. Maybe we're going to talk about this risk today. Maybe we're going to talk about how we could promote our mission in this regard. And then instead of just having it in everyone's got a little box on the screen, you force it by setting up small breakout rooms. Maybe you put 2 or 3 people per room, and then they come back and they have to report what they discussed. I mean, that's one idea. And it kind of just, now when it's just, 1 or 2 people staring at each other, you're forced to engage in a sense. And maybe that can help spark that conversation.
Someone also asked, how do you find board members? I mean, part of the way you can do it is there are certain things like Board Strong, which help to connect boards with individuals who want to serve on boards with nonprofit organizations. Accounting, New York State Society of CPAs and other state societies have areas where accountants want to serve on boards, so you can kind of reach out. Same thing happens on the legal side of things. There are lawyers that want to serve on boards, and if you reach out to some of the state societies or even the county societies, you might be able to find people there. I would also suggest, committees. If you have a strong committee structure and you've got non-board members on committees, you're basically setting up, a future potential board members. Also look to your volunteers. Who are the effective volunteers within the organization? What makes them effective? What makes them effective? Is that going to make them effective as a board member too? So, I mean, there's a lot of other places you can look, even talking to existing board members and ask them who they know that might be a good board member. But again, it's going through, and as you go through, it's also making sure that you take the time to vet and interview and discover and understand if they are going to be a good fit, if they can meet the time commitment that you need as an organization and everything else. Question here, how would you suggest compensation as an executive director also pursue grants and write grants and will manage them? Is it a conflict of interest for me to be compensated to manage? I don't know if that person is also a board member. So New York State, if this is a New York State organization, New York State does allow for board members to also serve as employees of an organization. It's not my favorite thing in the world. I prefer if you have that separation, especially if you're, as it says here, an executive director, because if you're on the board and you're also the executive director, how are you your own boss? So you just really want to be very, very careful about that when you're going through it. In terms of developing compensation for the executive director, if you go to the 990, the 990 lists about, in Schedule J, it lists about 8 or 9 different things that boards should be looking at. And when you look at those different things, it's things like comp studies, looking at other 990s and everything else. So I was saying that we didn't have enough questions and now we're basically out of time. So basically, here's the bottom line, right? So engaged boards, if I can speak English, change everything. They amplify impact, right? They drive strategy and they make mission unstoppable. A board that shows up prepared, asks the right questions, and stays mission focused is the single greatest asset any nonprofit can have. So whether your board is brand new or decades old, the opportunity is the same: to elevate the work, deepen the impact, right? We want to have that deep impact and make sure every decision you make moves the organization forward. Again, having that mission in front of you all the time and looking at the decisions that are made and making sure they're aligned to the mission.
Yeah, and we want to thank you all for the work that you do, because we know board service isn't always easy. It takes time. It takes a lot of energy. I mean, it's hard to fill these spots, right? And most importantly, it takes heart. So, but the difference you make is real. And our hope today is that this conversation gives you a fresh perspective or maybe an idea or two, some practical tools to strengthen your governance and deepen your engagement, and ultimately drive your mission further than ever before.
We're going to force you to look at us one more time. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us. We'll be sending out the slides and recording to everyone who registered. Feel free to share with your boards. Join us on the 23rd for our next presentation. And I think Kelly just put the link in there for it. So again, everybody, thank you. And we appreciate you and keep doing magic every day, which is what you as nonprofits do. So thank you very much.